ma'am.
Cadet Schmitz, Delta Flight. I was wondering, as far as this experience went, you talked about love and stuff and why you went into the service, but as far as this day went, did it shake your confidence in what you were doing, or did it strengthen it?
Definitely strengthened. That's where I definitely found out that if you don't lose, or excuse me, if you don't quit trying, you don't lose. And that's where that was reinforced. That was something that my parents had tried to teach us. There were 7 of us kids, and that's one of the things that they tried to teach us, that no matter what you're faced with, you don't lose till you quit trying. And I just thought it was one of those things that Mom and Dad, keep trying to help you understand. But when that happened that night, that's when it truly sunk into my heart, and that's when I knew, no matter what you're faced with, you truly don't lose till you get to that point where you go, I quit. Cool?
Thank you, sir.
Cool is Army speak for do you concur? Yes, sir.
Sir, Cadet Mitchell, Delta Flight. What were your, first off, sir, thank you for your service, exemplary service. What were your first feelings, thoughts that you had when you were first told you were receiving that honor?
Total disbelief. Truly. I did not believe in my heart that I had done anything that would earn the Medal of Honor. I had done for my brothers what I knew they would do for me. And that's not necessarily what I considered heroic. I did for my brothers what I knew they'd do for me. Cool.
We'll make this joint before it's over with, right? You learn a little Army language tonight.
And if you agree with what I've said and I say hua, your proper response is to hua me back. That way I know that you concur.
You better make him practice it was bad.
Hua. Hua. Hey, we're good.
There you go.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Cadet Schmitz, Delta Flight. I know that Vietnam, at the time, was typically regarded as a war that the people were not happy with. What was your reception coming back and when receiving the Medal of Honor? I think that would be interesting to know.
Yes, ma'am. The knowledge while we were in Vietnam of what was happening back in America was extremely limited. What was put on Armed Forces Radio, Armed Forces Television, which we did not have access to. If we got to see a TV, if you just happened to see one, maybe you got it for just a minute or two, but we did not normally get to watch television. The only newspapers that we got were some of the kids' mom and dads would send them newspapers from home. And that's where we would get the real story, because everything that was in the Armed Forces Radio, news, whatever, was very, it had been cleaned. So we didn't really understand what was happening back stateside until we came home. And what happened, we flew into Travis Air Force Base in California, and they broke us down in groups of 100. There were a lot of kids coming home in 68 time period. And so they broke us down in groups of 100, and we had to go through lines. We had to get shots, and we had to sign papers, and I think they took blood tests. It took 72 hours straight, standing in lines and going through the end processing, being welcomed back into the world. And we thought we were almost done, and the sergeant, we fell out in the parking lot by the buses. The sergeant said, okay, those of you that have civilian clothes fall out over here. Those of you that do not have civilian clothes fall out over here. Well, none of us had civilian clothes. We didn't need civilian clothes in Vietnam, so none of us had civilian clothes. We all fell out over here. And then he explained that you will have to go to the commissary and buy civilian clothes because we cannot allow you to fly through the commercial airport in San Francisco because of what the response we've been having, and it's extremely negative. And he tried his best to explain what the extent that some of these, and I'm trying to think of the right words, people not quite as patriotic as we would have liked them to be, were at the airport creating problems for our soldiers in uniform to get on TV. Because this was one of the things that they enjoyed doing. They knew that if they could get a soldier to lay a hand on them, well, then they'd get on TV. And there were groups of hippies at the airport that were doing this. So we went in and got civilian clothes. Now they had sports jackets and, you know, dress pants and stuff, but we were 19, 20-year-old kids. We didn't necessarily want that. We wanted blue jeans and tennis shoes, and the only blue jeans they had were 501 Levi's, the old button-up kind, and the only t-shirt that they had left was a white V-neck pocket t-shirt, and the only tennis shoes that they had left were red ball high tops, and they cost $1.25. That's PX. So here's all 100 of us. That's what we all, blue jeans, white shirt. We're all dressed exactly the same. We fell back out, and the sergeant looked at us. You know, he had done his job. We all had civilian clothes. We picked up our duffel bags and got on the bus, headed towards San Francisco Airport, and the sergeant was on our bus. So we got to have some in-depth knowledge of what these hippies were willing to do to try to get the GI to interact with them, and then when they would interact with them, then they would get on television. And just some of the stories were just phenomenal of what they would do to get the soldier to try to educate the hippie. And when we got there, there were 3 of us that were flying in that 100-man group. There were 3 of us that were flying into Indianapolis. And so we went to the Eastern Airlines counter and we bought our ticket. And I think it was 78 or 88 or 98. It was less than $100 for the airline ticket back on Eastern Airlines. And we got our airlines tickets, walked down through the big lobby and down the concourse to where our airplane was to leave from. And when we left this big room and went down the concourse, there were a group of hippies there, about 20 or so hippies. And they were dressed in the traditional hippie attire, long loose, you know, the long loose silk gowns and the rope and around their waist, and they had the long greasy hair. And these are the guys. They had little baggies, paper lunch bags, is what they look like, under their rope belt. And the lead hippie come traipsing up to me and he said, "Hey dude, if you want to get to your aircraft, you have to run our gauntlet." Well, in Mooresville High School in football practice, if you made a mistake during practice, when you went in to take your shower, you got down on all 4, crab walk, what we called it, and all the rest of the team would whack you on your bottom. And that was just to help you, remind you not to, and it didn't hurt. Oh, yeah, it hurt, but it didn't hurt. So we knew what a gauntlet was. And we said, we put our duffel bags down and we said, "Well, what are we gonna do, guys?" Well, we remember what the old sergeant said, that, you know, that usually the hippies will do almost anything to get on TV. Well, at that moment, we didn't see any TVs there, but we were listening to what the old sergeant said. So, well, okay, we won't run your gauntlet, we will walk your gauntlet. So we picked up our duffel bags, and they fell in a line, facing each other, and I teach cut, and we started walking down their gauntlet, carrying our duffel bags. About the 3rd set of people in, I was leading, about the 3rd set of people in, they started hitting us with, they were not clubs, they were objects of art. They were big clubs is what they were, but they were, you know, they were carved, and they were beautiful, some of them were beautiful. But even back then, you couldn't bring clubs into an airport. These were objects of art. And I heard Wabash, the kid, and I don't remember his real name, he was from Wabash, Indiana, we called him Wabash. I heard Wabash go, "Huh!" And I looked over my shoulder now because we had white t-shirts on. They hit Wabash right across the forehead, and he was bleeding. And when I looked back over my shoulder, just blood just dripping and running. I mean, it wasn't real bad, but it was bleeding real bad. And that just, and I remembered what the old sergeant said, and we just kept walking. Well, they started reaching in, they started putting plastic gloves on, rubber gloves, and then they got their bags out, and then they started reaching in their bags, and they were, what was in the bag? The bag was stuff they picked up in the yard after their dog, and worse. and they started rubbing it in her hair, and as we went through, well, when rubbing it in her hair and on her clothes didn't work, then they started trying to get it in her mouth, and they would put it in her ear, and we just kept rolling. When we cleared the gauntlet, and we tried to, 15, 20 foot past, and we stopped and set our duffel bags down, and that was the first time that we stopped and we seen each other. And that just fried us, because we were all a bloody mess, had dog crap all over us, and worse. When we looked at each other in the eye, we knew what we were getting ready to do. The three of us was getting ready to take out 20 hippies, which would have been no problem. We were, now this is just seconds in actual time. We looked at each other, we were ready to go get them. Where we had started at the beginning of the gauntlet was the TV camera, Channel 5 from San Francisco with the red light blinking. They had just videoed everything that had happened. And I've tried for 45 years to get that footage, and the footage disappeared. But when we seen the TV red light blinking, we stopped and we saluted the camera. And we turned and picked up our duffel bags. We went to the little stand, which was just like a little podium, is where the stewardess was taking the ticket from. And they had heard, the stewardess had heard what had just happened, and she said, "We're going to take you right on the aircraft." Now that's when you still had to go outside to get on the airplane. And they took us down to the airplane, took us in, put us in first class, and that's back when first class really was first class. And they took our shirts off of us. There were 3 stewardesses, and they took our shirts off of us and cleaned us up, bandaged us, and they gave us long sleeve white shirts, which were probably pilot shirts. But we're sitting there in first class, and we're all cleaned up, and we're looking at each other, and they brought us a glass of champagne. First champagne this old farm boy ever had. Boone's Farm and stuff like that I had, but never had champagne. And we're looking there, and that's when Wabash, he said, "Life's a bitch, isn't it?" And we toasted. When we landed at Indianapolis, of course, we'd called our moms and dads and let them know that we would come. And they'd made signs, and as many of the family that was possible was there to greet us home. So that reception was good, but there were way too many kids that got the reception like San Francisco. Next question. Now I will answer any question you have. If there's none too personal. If you truly have the question in your heart, I will open up my heart and let you look in. Any better deal than that? Cool. Yes, sir.
Sir, Davis Speaking Action Group. Sir, I'm just wondering, how long were you into your deployment when this attack happened, and also how regular were direct contact with the enemy besides one of this magnitude? Would you regularly see attacks on your position, or was this pretty uncommon incident?
Attacks of the level of that night? No, we had never seen an attack. There were 42 of us in a reinforced heavy weapons battalion, 1,500 men. No, normal, and there's no such thing as normal in combat. Usually the way it was, it would be 3 to 10. If there were 10 of the enemy, that was a lot, as a rule. That night there were 1,500, and they were NVA. In the citation, it says Viet Cong. There were not. We never seen 1,500 Viet Cong in one position. It's much like our terrorists that our young troops are fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq and today. Normally you don't see 1,500 of the terrorists. But in this case, it was NVA, and they were very well trained. They were in uniform. I mean, they were good troops. As a rule, from my experience, the NVA were very honorable troops. They were honorable to the point that, well, I can remember several instances when one of our troops had been laying out in the field, and I got the attention. I looked at my enemy right in the eye, and I took my weapon and I set it down, and then I started standing up slowly. And they could see me doing this, and they knew, because they could hear him crying too, and they knew what was happening, and they would let me go out or one of us would go out and get our troop and bring it back, and we would allow them to do the same thing. There can and should be honor among warriors. And the NBA were, in most cases, were very honorable. The Viet Cong, I can't say that about. Did I answer your question okay?
Absolutely. Hey, sir.
Cool. Yes, sir.
Sir, Cadet Clark, Delta Flight. Building off that last comment, sir, how did your experiences, especially the circumstances under which you won the Medal of Honor, shape or change your views on the ethics of warfare in general, or in particular how those who serve should conduct themselves while under combat?
There always must be rules of warfare. In fighting the Viet Cong, in fighting terrorists, what we have found that the terrorists have no rules. If you're fighting military, normally they have rules and abide by them, but the terrorists do not, and it gets so frustrating because what the decorum that you expect your enemy to have, like I said, there should and can be honor among warriors, but when they don't show any honor, then what do you do? Then what's your proper response? Well, we tried to do the best we could. We tried to maintain our honor as much as they would allow us to. Which unfortunately, sometimes you had to go places that a soldier shouldn't have to go, and I mean in their heart. You had to go return at the same level that they were giving you. Do you understand that? Which does not make me proud, but because that was the way they were operating, that's the way you had to operate if you were to survive.
Whoa.
Thank you, sir. Next question. Yes, sir.
Sir, Cadet Mitchell again, Delta Flight. When you receive the Medal of Honor, do you credit what you've learned in service and how you achieved that status of Medal of Honor recipient? Who would you thank for getting to where you are now today?
Well, I would definitely believe that my parents and grandparents had a portion of that, because it's amazing of the instances in combat when things were happening, and you would think that your mind would be totally full of what was happening here, but my mom and dad were sitting on my shoulder. The night that I earned the medal, that's what I want to do, is take this off and pass it around. The night that I earned the medal, when I looked across the river and seen Wendell Holloway across the river, my mama was sitting on my shoulder, and she said, "Don't you leave your brother," because that's what she had told me when I was the big brother and had a younger brother. At one point, I was the little brother, and I can remember Mom telling my big brothers, "Now, don't you leave your brother in the woods. Now, don't you leave your mother in the woods." And my mom was about 9 foot tall, weighed 400 pounds. No, that's not right. You know what I mean? And then when I was the big brother, Mama would tell me that. And that night, I mean, it was just, I heard her voice crystal clear when I looked over there and seen Wendell. "Now, don't you leave your brother across that woods. Don't you leave your brother in that woods." I went and got my brother. Next question. Yes, sir.
Sir, Cadet Graff, Operations Support Squadron Commander. How did you ever go back into another conflict after that event, or did you? And like, how long did you stay in the service?
I was medically retired in 1969, September 27th of 1969. When I came back, my mom and dad, or at that time, my mom and dad was living in Illinois. And when I came back, the governor of Illinois and William Childs Westmoreland, General Westmoreland, knew each other somehow. And the governor wanted me, as a Medal of Honor recipient, to go into the Illinois National Guard to help promote the Guard Reserve, because they really needed the support. Well, as being medically retired from the military, I couldn't do that. And they worked out a deal, what it was, I didn't get paid. I went to the Illinois National Guard and didn't get out until 1984, but they didn't pay me. But I was legally, I was in the Guard, and I helped all the Guard units from all over the United States.
I don't think you did real good on that deal.
I didn't.
No.
I did the best I could. Did that answer that all right, sir?
Yes, sir.
He asked if you were in any other conflicts.
Oh, any other conflict? You mean any other fights when I was in Vietnam?
I was just, did you ever go back, or if you retired?
As a Medal of Honor recipient, I have had, I've had the privilege of going over and be involved in many different things as a civilian, and that pays a lot more than being a soldier. But as in the military, no. Vietnam was the only combat that I seen as in the military. Next question. Yes, sir.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Turner, I'm the commander of the Air Force RTC detachment here. I regret I was in class right before
No
you
worries.
came, so I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet. I actually have a lot of questions, but I'm not gonna fire them all at you at once.
It's good.
I was thinking about the video that we saw, and something that you said kind of resonated with me. You seemed very humble. You were saying that you were just doing your job. And I've heard and seen other stories of other Medal of Honor winners who have said or expressed similar sentiments. Having said that, you are the recipient of the highest honor that could be paid a member of the military in our country. I'm really curious, what has being a Medal of Honor winner, if you could pick out the one kind of most gratifying thing that has happened to you since receiving the Medal of Honor, what would that be?
Gratifying thing?
Yes, sir.
Well, there are many things that are gratifying. I got to know Jimmy Doolittle like a daddy, and Pappy Bollington like a daddy, and Eddie Rickenbacker for World War I. These were, when I was brought into the Medal of Honor Society, there were